Welcome everyone to A Call for Judgment. Some of you may have noticed that the skies have been very, murky, very shielded from the sun. Now, I can't get into deep conspiracy theories because obviously I just constantly am getting hammered for talking about a lot of these issues that people should be suspicious about. But of course, this is another one of those situations. Now you might say, wait a minute. Forest fires and those types of things happen all the time, Mr. Call for Judgment. Those are a normal occurrence. Well, if you actually research sun shielding and you research, some of these famous people like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, George Soros, they have an obsession with shielding the sun, which would tell us that they're so obsessed with shielding the sun that they obviously can use methods like this to do so. Now, some of you may not realize that this is actually a method that they can use to block the sun's rays. Why would they do that? Well, multiple reasons. Number one, remember, they need to convince everybody that climate change is real. The majority of people do not seem to care much about it because a lot of people don't see anything actually happening, right? Number two, what else does it do? Well, it blocks the rays from the sun. It blocks vitamin D. And of course, number three, it makes it very difficult to farm, doesn't it? Now, I'm going to show you a clip here, and you could see these articles from Time Magazine. Some of these written in 2023. This one's from February 24, 2023, why billionaires are obsessed with blocking out the sun. And then conveniently, of course, we have a wildfire that spread so far out of Canada, where it's not really all that hot, it spreads down the United States of America, causing cancellations, causing people in New York City to have to wear masks again, causing people in New York City and other places around the country to have difficulty breathing because of the air quality. But what people, again, don't realize is that there are many methods that they can use, in addition, obviously, to chemtrails, where they can actually block the sun. And this is what they want to do. They want to block out the sun. Here they are even talking about it by using chemtrailing and cloud seeding and other ways to manipulate. But remember, they can also use fire.
The record number of fires burning across Brazil's Amazon rainforest has prompted renewed global outcry over climate change. And big spending. $5 million from Leonardo DiCaprio, £10 million from the UK. Meanwhile, Bill Gates is backing the first high-altitude experiment of one radical climate change solution, creating a massive chemical cloud that could cool the Earth. It's called solar geoengineering, and it's highly controversial.
How long will it be that countries keep experiencing these climate impacts before someone gets desperate and says, hey, we need to cool the planet with solar geoengineering?
It would look something like this. Thousands of planes would fly very high and use nozzles to inject millions of tons of light-reflecting particles into the stratosphere. It would create a thin chemical cloud of those particles around the whole planet, blocking some sunlight from reaching the surface. It would mimic a giant volcanic eruption, which we know cools the Earth. Back in 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines. It was the largest eruption to affect a densely populated area, creating avalanches and giant mud flows that left more than 700 dead and 30,000 homeless. It also spewed a cloud of 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide particles into the stratosphere. That chemical cloud was hundreds of miles across and reflected about 2% of sunlight back to space. And in 1992, the Earth was cooler than in 1991.
That is part of the mechanism, but you do this in a controlled way.
Modeling studies have found that it could reduce the intensity of heat waves, for instance. Apparently it could reduce the rate of sea level rise. It could reduce the intensity of tropical storms.
But it also comes with significant risks and uncertainties.
Things like mass famine, mass flooding, drought, of kinds that will affect very large populations.
It could weaken monsoons in India, China, and Africa enough to affect crops. It could eradicate blue sky.
You start increasing the amount of diffuse light and you have less direct light, which is the same thing as saying it looks hazy and white.
And if the global community decides it should stop?
So you stop injecting it, and after a year, the cloud is gone, and you get this rapid warming at a rate much faster than you would get if we had done nothing. If you've taken out the greenhouse gases that are adding to the warming, then the temperature won't go up, it'll stay what it is. So if we don't stop emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we don't try as hard as we can to do that, then there's no point in doing solar geoengineering.
A 2016 opinion poll conducted by the Harvard group doing solar geoengineering research found that 67% of subjects support its use. One reason this technology is appealing, it's cheap. One study estimates it would cost an average of $2.25 billion globally every year for the first 15 years of deployment. Compare that to the $500 billion the U.S. government estimates it will cost just the U.S. by 2100 if no action is taken against climate change. Or the $1.6 to $3.8 trillion projected global spending by 2050 on low-carbon energy production. You can also compare it to direct air carbon capturing, another climate change solution backed by Bill Gates and by big oil. It involves sucking billions of tons of carbon out of the air. And at $100 to $200 a ton, it could be big business. Solar geoengineering, on the other hand, is so cheap that nobody currently stands to make money from the process.
But just because a solution is cheap doesn't make it a good one. It's cheap and dangerous.
It doesn't require a lot of materials. It doesn't require a big innovation. It basically affects the whole planet with one project. So that is not necessarily a situation that has a lot of profit opportunity, right? Because there's not going to be a lot of different people that can do it and compete in a marketplace.
Bill Gates is among a dozen individual donors and 14 foundations backing the first stratospheric solar geoengineering experiment out of Harvard. It's called Stratospheric Controlled Perturbation Experiment, or SCOPEX. A high-altitude balloon will lift instruments about 20 kilometers into the stratosphere, where it will release less than 2 kilograms of different naturally occurring chemicals, like calcium carbonate and sulfates, and then measure the change in atmospheric chemistry and light scattering. The Harvard group that runs SCOPEX and other experiments has raised more than $16 million, more than double any other solar geoengineering effort. And annual global funding has gone up from $1 million in 2008 to $8 million in 2018, with the majority of that funding coming from the U.S. The first phase of SCOPEX will cost around $3 million, with much more needed for wider research on solar geoengineering. To this point, stratosphere injections have only been tested with climate modeling. In the UK, a government-funded solar radiation management test called SPICE was cancelled in 2012 because of issues with patents.
And we're not trying to develop any technology that is patented or where we want to make money with this later on.
A study last year found that no existing aircraft can inject the stratosphere at a high enough altitude, but developing a new high-altitude tanker would not be technologically difficult or prohibitively expensive. Nozzles still need to be designed that can continuously blast out trillions of particles, and scientists still need to decide what chemicals those particles should be made of. But unlike cloud brightening, which is another solar reflection technique, the tech needed for stratospheric injections is not far off.
The technology is not the main thing that's holding this back. The main thing that's holding it back is the uncertainty about what the exact effects would be and the positives and negatives of its effects, and the governance and decision-making process for implementing it.
Other radical attempts to control climate change have been tested in the past, like when one California businessman dumped 100 tons of iron dust in the Pacific to spawn the growth of carbon-absorbing plankton. But unlike small, sometimes rogue experiments, planet-wide solar geoengineering will require buy-in from the international community.
In our simulations we found China got warmer and drier relative to the past when you stabilized global temperature, and India was now cooler and wetter. So you can see there how international relations around using this technology could become complicated.
I mean, we can't even decide on what to do about emissions of greenhouse gases, and so how are we going to decide on setting the planetary thermostat?
There's the real concern that we won't be able to reach agreement, we being the entire planet, and so there's the prospect that countries just go ahead and do solar geoengineering, and that causes disagreement, conflict, tension, even possibly war.
3 years ago, the international community did come together when almost 200 countries signed the Paris Agreement on climate change, agreeing to limit global temperature rise to less than 2 degrees Celsius. Since then, President Trump has stated his intent to withdraw from the agreement.
The Paris Climate Accord is simply the latest example of Washington entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States.
And global emissions are not being reduced fast enough to reach these goals.
We know what we should be doing. What we should be doing is reducing carbon emissions. So we're creating a moral hazard. We are providing an out for you where you can say, well, I'm going to fix this technologically instead of doing the ethically right thing to do.
It's way too early to give up on much more ethical approaches to climate change. Right. The future generations were literally in the room to question us on our dubious arguments. We wouldn't get far with some of the kinds of arguments we're trying to offer for neglecting conventional climate policy and going down this path.
For now, the failure to rapidly reduce emissions has prompted more exploration of alternative solutions like carbon dioxide removal and solar geoengineering. But scientists warn we will still need to reduce emissions too.
If we're not cutting CO2 emissions at the same time, from my perspective, there's little point in doing this because you would have to start using ever-increasing amounts.
No responsible scientist says that it's a silver bullet. All the responsible scientists say this is something that we deploy if we had to, alongside all the other stuff that we already have to do.
The U.S. Academies of Sciences is holding a series of meetings to study solar geoengineering, including one at Stanford this month. The committee will issue a report next year with recommendations for how, or if, solar geoengineering research should continue. Some scientists say the research is necessary in order to arm future generations with the ability to enact this backup plan, even though it seems nearly impossible now.
We ought to start working on this solar climate engineering problem right now with as much urgency as we can, so that if we want to deploy it in a decade or so, we understand what we have to do.
This is a real moral horror, especially in a situation where we're not doing all the things that we could be doing to minimize the risks of climate catastrophe now.
But experts do agree that more public awareness is needed around solar geoengineering, because within a couple decades, for better or worse, it could be part of the solution, helping return the planet to pre-industrial temperatures.
Modelling evidence gathered over the last decade has pretty consistently found that a moderate amount of solar geoengineering could significantly reduce many of the impacts of climate change.
So it must be a huge coincidence, right? And of course, anybody who has questions about this stuff, when you see these things happening, when you see how far the smoke has been traveling, and then you say to yourself, this is different, this is interesting. How come it's the same people over and over and over again who have these obsessions? They have obsessions with putting certain things in you. They have obsessions with blocking the sun. They have obsessions with you not being able to eat meat. You know, just things that we should be suspicious about as human beings when you see the same people who have all of these specific agendas where people just kind of go, I don't even understand why would they want to do that? Well, why would they want to do it? Because they want to control you 100%. They want to control your life. They want to dictate what they can and can't allow you to eat, where you can and can't be allowed to travel. So this article, I'll read from February 24th of this year. At the Munich Security Conference last week, George Soros got on stage to talk about the existential risk that climate change poses to human civilization, as well as what appeared to be the 92-year-old Hungarian-American billionaire's preferred method of addressing it, brightening the clouds over the Arctic to reflect the sun's energy away from the melting ice caps. But questions aside as to whether Soros, ludicrously maligned in conspiracy-minded right-wing circles, is the best advocate for solar geoengineering. He's not the only billionaire who's recently become interested in bouncing the sun's rays back into space. Among the world's ultra-rich, plans to swat back the sun's rays like their capital gains taxes to, as it were, apply a generous helping of sunblock to the Earth's atmosphere have seemingly been all the rage. So it's pretty incredible that we actually talk about this stuff with climate change, where we're actually willing to sacrifice the sun and sacrifice growing food because apparently ice caps are melting. But again, you have to be careful about what you go into detail about, because people like me are getting strikes for talking about Kylie Minogue or whatever its name is. So I have to be extremely careful. But what people need to do is critically think, because it's the same group of very, very rich people who seem to have the same ideas in mind, who want you to eat bugs, who want you to stop eating meat that people have eaten for centuries and centuries and centuries. They want you to put certain stuff in your body. I mean, the list goes on of the agendas that they're tied to. They pretty much want you to become a machine. They want you to put technology inside of you. I mean, We can go on for days about the agendas that you can find all these people invested in, right? All the investments that they make all just seem to tie into. But we're told it's for the betterment of society because, of course, it makes perfect sense to limit the amount of food we can grow because we don't need that, right? We don't need that. Oh, man. Bill Gates, for instance, backed a project by Harvard University scientists to test an idea to spray calcium carbonate into the atmosphere in the skies over northern Scandinavia in 2021. The project was ultimately canned after outcry from local indigenous groups and environmentalists. Jeff Bezos put Amazon's supercomputer capabilities to work, modeling the effects of plans to inject huge amounts of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere later that year. Earlier this month, Dustin Moskovitz, a billionaire Facebook co-founder, plowed $900,000 into funding for scientists in Mali, Brazil, Thailand, and other countries to study the potential effects of solar geoengineering. Even the smaller fry are getting in on the action, with venture capitalists giving a combined $750,000 to a company pledging to implement a planetary solar geoengineering project using SO2. Who gave these people the ability? Don't we all have any say over the air that we're breathing? We're just giving power to these people who just happen to be linked to all these massive, massive issues that have been going on in the world. Just conveniently, of course, right? It's not a coincidence by any stretch that they're all just seem to be involved with telling you what you should and shouldn't take, telling you to put on a mask. I mean, the list goes on, right? But again, they care about all of us. They want to save the world, right? Wink, wink. So I covered this before. Of course, this is just another video that was deleted. The company's called Make Sunsets. It's a first U.S.-based test. They conducted their first U.S.-based test last week. This was back in February when I covered it. Launching balloons containing SO2 in Nevada. Such proposals to essentially hack the atmosphere, known as solar geoengineering, have been controversial in the climate science world due to potential side effects on global weather, feasibility concerns, and the risks of so-called moral hazard, essentially the worry that promoting the potential of a quick fix solution could distract political pressure and popular will from addressing the underlying problem of carbon emissions from burning fossil fuels, okay? So, again, the funny thing about it is that they like to tell us that all the stuff that we see in the sky all the time is water vapor, which just ends up sitting there for the entire day, right? You wake up, the sky is blue. Oh, look, there's water vapor, wink, wink, flying from above. And for the next 8 hours, your sky is a complete haze as if you're over hanging out in Los Angeles, right? And all these idiots out there just conveniently believe them. They're showing you now that they want to be able to use the planes to spray this shield in the sky, which they also could do by doing test runs with massive fires, right? You see what's happening here? Just like we had another test run recently, because they're watching the effects of people and how they're responding to these events. They're gathering data on who's going outside, who's staying inside. These are all things that they do, and people give them the benefit of the doubt because they don't think that there's human beings who are this sick. Well, they're right, because these aren't human beings. We can't classify these people as human beings. So it goes on to say, basically the situation is as follows. Emissions cuts are the plan A of climate action. It's a no-brainer. We're hurling millions of tons of planet-warming gases into the atmosphere, and we really need to just stop it. It's really also plan B through E. Plan F, a horribly dangerous plan by comparison, would be to give up on trying to cut emissions now, and instead that putting different chemicals like sulfur dioxide, which of course, they don't tell you the effects of having sulfur fall onto your body, along with aluminum and barium and everything else. And we know that most of these demons smell like sulfur, but that's another story for another day. So the effects of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere will roughly cancel out the effects, but with some time running out and global emissions still going in the wrong direction, the scientific debate has shifted in recent years. And again, they don't mention by doing this how this affects growing food. Why? Because at the same time, they're telling you that we should be eating cockroaches. They're telling us that we need to be eating bugs. They're not talking about the famines that are taking place because they're creating the famines. They're not talking about the lakes that are drying up because they're sucking the water out of them. Because people are just like, there's no way that anybody would do that. They seem like really nice people. And that's why they've gotten people stuck in this left-right divide. You have one side that's completely insane, that believes anything that the magical tell-lie vision tells them. They don't critically think. They don't ask questions. They don't believe that there's wicked people. The only people they believe are wicked are Christians. So while the Christians are trying to wake people up, the majority of Christians who actually know what's going on, although unfortunately many Christians have no idea about the climate agenda. I try to tell people all the time who are Christians, they have no idea. This is one of those things where they're talking about all the stuff we see happening in schools and libraries, which is understandable, and they should be talking about it. But they actually buy into this other stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, we need to do this. They don't see the ultimate plan here with it. You don't hear any conservatives out there speaking heavily against it, talking about carbon footprints, behavioral control, monitoring 24/7, being able to stop you from going places, social scores, all the things that are implemented in China, which are going to be implemented around the world, specifically here in America. And again, these are the types of things they don't want discussed. Because they say, you can't question this type of stuff because it's denial. You can't question this type of stuff because, you can't question it because you're questioning science. Just like when we all questioned science the last time around because it wasn't real science, and we questioned even the common sense behind it, and we were all shut down, we were all silenced, we were all proven correct, but still are told that we're conspiracy theorists, right? Because we actually know what's going on and we know what the wicked are trying to do. So the article goes on to say other scientists have argued that some amount of solar geoengineering can work as a kind of climate stopgap, essentially, that if emission cuts don't come fast enough, we can pursue geoengineering to flatten the peak of global temperatures. And again, the temperatures are all being cooled by what you're seeing going on in Canada. That is actual science. You could actually just look it up. You can look up, would a massive amount of smoke cool the earth? And the answer is yes. Would a massive amount of smoke block vitamin D? Would it block the sun? Would it block plants and food from actually growing? The answer is yes. That's actual science. But you can't ask anything that makes sense anymore because you're just labeled a conspiracy theorist, and the people who are in power don't have to answer anything. They don't answer anything. You see how it is when you see these interviews at the White House and stuff. They answer nothing. They deflect, and they just label you as a racist or a conspiracy nut, and then they just stop. And they change the subject. They don't know anything else. They're just like, well, that's questioning science. Oh, yeah. Well, that's actual proof. And the fact that these billionaires are absolutely obsessed with sun shielding, with blocking the sun, is just more proof that these types of experiments that they're doing are going to be long-term. As they run tests, they watch how people react to it. What are people doing? Are people staying indoors? Are people remasking up? Are people actually noticing what's really going on? And then they take all that data, they use social media to see who's tweeting what, they see YouTube who's talking about what. The majority of people aren't talking about it. Just like in the beginning of Warp Speed, a lot of people weren't talking about it. They're like, yeah, it's all legit, it's Trump, right? Until they flipped it the other way, and then everybody got, the majority of people started catching on. But it's unbelievable. And again, you could believe whatever you want. You could look at this and be like, why would they make it? Why would they start it? Why would they do that? Or, these things actually do happen. You can look at it whatever perspective you want, as long as you're critically thinking. You don't have to agree with what I say. You don't have to agree with it. But I'm showing you literally articles that are written and things that are being said by these same exact people. The same exact people want these things, sun shielding, are the same exact people who wanted other things to be done over the last 10 years or so and have been forcing it onto our society. Whether it's behavioral control, whether it's taking your medicine, wink, wink, that they want you to take. I mean, it's incredible that no one's suspicious of these people for the crimes they're committing against humanity. I thank everyone for being here. If you're still listening at this point, please make sure you subscribe to my other channel. Another strike on this one. I won't be able to upload for 2 weeks. No idea what gets strikes and what doesn't anymore. They just make it up as they go. It's pretty much, I don't know what to say at this point. I don't know how much longer I can continue to do this. It's not feasible for me at this point. I continue to lose a lot of subs on the website. I continue to lose a lot of Patreons, and I continue to lose any type of ad revenue on YouTube, which means as things get more and more expensive, I don't have the time. And then not only just the time, because I have to make up other ways to be able to, fight off the income that's being taken away, but I also don't have the time literally to continue to make channels and go from, 550,000, 200,000, 150,000, 100,000. to barely being able to get 20. That's what they do. They bleed you out. And that's what they've been doing to me. This is what I was worried about, was that, people would just keep hearing me say sub to my other channel, sub to sub. And they would just be like, I'm already sub, which is understandable because nobody wants to hear it, right? And I don't expect people to know my day-to-day, strikes and all that kind of crap. People are sick of hearing it. So they're just bleeding me out at this point, but I'll do my best. Please just make sure you sub to the other channel link below. Thank you for being here. Hope you're doing well. God bless all of you and your families.